March 12, 1943. North Atlantic, 400 nautical miles southwest of Iceland. Kapitan Lieutenant Heinrich Müller pressed his eye against the periscope of U-247, watching the silhouettes of Allied merchant vessels cutting through the gray dawn waters. 23 ships in convoy, HX-229. Their holds heavy with American steel and grain destined for Britain's war effort. What Müller couldn't see were the invisible hunters already closing in on his position. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. High above the surface, beyond the range of his hydrophones, Lieutenant Commander William Hayes adjusted the frequency on his H-2S radar aboard a Royal Air Force Liberator bomber. The revolutionary centimetric radar painted a clear picture of the submarine's wake, even when the U-boat remained submerged. For the first time in naval warfare, the hunter had become the hunted through technology that rendered traditional submarine tactics obsolete. Müller would fire his torpedoes and score hits on 2 freighters before discovering that his escape route had been mathematically calculated and blocked by forces he never saw coming. Within hours, U-247 would join 782 other German submarines at the bottom of the Atlantic, victims of a secret technological revolution that transformed the Battle of the Atlantic from a contest of seamanship into a demonstration of scientific supremacy. This wasn't just another convoy battle. This was the moment when traditional naval warfare collided head-on with the dawn of electronic combat, and the results would reshape military thinking forever. The catastrophic losses that befell the German U-boat force between January and June 1943 didn't happen by accident. They resulted from Operation Neptune's Trident, a classified Allied program that weaponized scientific research on an unprecedented scale. While German submariners fought with the same tactics that had terrorized Allied shipping for 3 years, British and American scientists had quietly revolutionized anti-submarine warfare through innovations that rendered underwater stealth nearly impossible. The transformation began in the laboratories of the Telecommunications Research Establishment at Malvern, where Dr. Robert Hanbury Brown led a team developing centimeter radar technology. Unlike the meter-wave radar systems that had dominated early war detection, the new H-2S radar operated on wavelengths measured in centimeters, providing resolution sharp enough to detect submarine periscopes and even the subtle surface disturbances created by submerged vessels moving at speed. The technical breakthrough came in September 1942, when Brown's team successfully miniaturized the magnetron valve, allowing powerful radar transmitters to be installed in aircraft small enough for long-range patrol missions lasting up to 14 hours. What made this radar revolutionary wasn't just its precision, but its ability to penetrate weather conditions that had previously provided natural concealment for submarines. Traditional optical reconnaissance became useless in the frequent storms and fog banks of the North Atlantic, but centimeter radar could track surface contacts through rain, snow, and cloud cover that reached down to wave level. By November 1942, the first operational H-2S units were being installed in Royal Air Force Coastal Command Liberators operating from bases in Northern Ireland and Iceland. Flight Lieutenant James Morrison flew the first combat mission equipped with the new technology on November 18th, tracking 3 separate submarine contacts during a single patrol over the Denmark Strait. All 3 submarines were forced to crash dive and abandon their attack approaches when Morrison's Liberator quietly banked around from behind the shadows. Appeared overhead, demonstrating how air superiority could neutralize submarine advantages even without direct attack. The radar breakthrough coincided with parallel developments in underwater detection that would prove equally devastating to German submarine operations. The Royal Navy's Anti-Submarine Detection Investigation Committee had been experimenting with high-frequency direction-finding equipment that could pinpoint submarine radio transmissions with unprecedented accuracy. Unlike earlier direction-finding systems that could only provide rough bearing estimates, the new Mark 7 Huff-Duff installations could triangulate submarine positions to within 5 nautical miles using multiple shore-based receiving stations. Commander Patricia Blackwood oversaw the Huff-Duff program from the Admiralty's Operational Intelligence Center in London, coordinating signals intelligence from listening posts scattered across the British Isles, Canada, and Iceland. Her team had identified a critical vulnerability in German submarine operations that could be exploited through careful analysis of communication patterns. German U-boats were required to maintain regular radio contact with headquarters in Lorient and Kiel, transmitting position reports, weather observations, and contact reports using encrypted communications. While British cryptographers were still struggling to break the Enigma naval codes on a consistent basis, they discovered that the timing and origin points of these transmissions revealed operational patterns that could be analyzed mathematically. By plotting transmission locations over time, Blackwood's analysts could predict submarine patrol routes, identify refueling rendezvous points, and even estimate when individual boats would need to return to port for resupply. This intelligence fusion turned submarine communications from a strength into a liability, allowing Allied forces to position hunter-killer groups along predicted submarine tracks. The third component of Operation Neptune's Trident involved weaponization of operational research, a relatively new field that applied statistical analysis to military problems. Professor Patrick Blackett, who had pioneered operational research for Royal Air Force Fighter Command during the Battle of Britain, was tasked with optimizing anti-submarine tactics using mathematical models that treated warfare as a series of probability equations. Blackett's team discovered that traditional anti-submarine patrols were fundamentally inefficient because they covered vast ocean areas randomly rather than focusing on zones where submarines were statistically most likely to appear. By analyzing shipping routes, submarine attack patterns, weather conditions, and fuel consumption rates, they developed patrol algorithms that increased the probability of submarine detection by over 400%. The mathematical approach revealed counterintuitive tactical principles that contradicted traditional naval thinking. Instead of spreading patrols evenly across convoy routes, optimal coverage required concentrating aircraft in narrow search corridors where submarines had to transit when moving between patrol areas and their bases. These choke points could be patrolled continuously with fewer aircraft, creating detection grids that submarines could not avoid. Blackett's calculations also determined optimal aircraft altitude for submarine detection, including radar horizon limitations, fuel consumption, and visual observation angles. The analysis showed that patrols conducted at 2,000 feet provided the best balance between radar coverage and crew endurance, allowing single aircraft to maintain surveillance over areas that have previously required multiple patrol flights. The operational research extended beyond detection to attack optimization, analyzing depth charge patterns, torpedo performance, and damage assessment techniques. Traditional anti-submarine attacks relied on dropping depth charges in patterns based on estimated submarine positions. But statistical analysis revealed that these attacks were successful less.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Than 15% of the time due to inaccurate position estimates and inadequate explosive coverage. The solution involved developing new depth charge spacing patterns calculated to ensure lethal pressure waves within a defined probability zone, even when submarine positions could only be estimated approximately. The Mark 11 Hedgehog, a forward-throwing anti-submarine weapon developed by the Department of Miscellaneous Weapons Development, allowed surface vessels to attack submarines without losing sonar contact, dramatically improving attack accuracy. Lieutenant Commander David Richardson commanded HMS Starling, one of the first frigates equipped with the complete Neptune's Trident system integration. His vessel carried the latest centimeter radar, improved sonar equipment, Huff-Duff receivers, and Hedgehog anti-submarine mortars, making it representative of the new generation of hunter-killer vessels that would transform the Battle of the Atlantic. Richardson's operational reports from early 1943 documented the dramatic change in anti-submarine warfare effectiveness. During his first patrol in January 1943, HMS Starling detected and engaged 7 separate submarine contacts, achieving 3 confirmed kills and forcing the remaining submarines to abandon their patrol areas. The success rate represented a 10-fold improvement over previous anti-submarine operations, demonstrating how technological integration could multiply combat effectiveness. The psychological impact on German submarine crews became apparent through intercepted prisoner-of-war interrogations conducted by the Combined Services Detailed Interrogation Center. Captured submariners reported confusion and demoralization as their traditional advantages disappeared seemingly overnight. Kapitänleutnant Werner Hartmann, captured when U-154 was sunk in February 1943, described the experience of being tracked by unseen enemies who appeared to predict his every maneuver. German submarine tactics had evolved through 3 years of successful operations based on stealth, surprise, and superior seamanship. U-boat commanders were trained to exploit weather conditions, darkness, and the vast emptiness of the Atlantic to approach convoys undetected. The sudden appearance of Allied forces that could track submarines through storms, locate them by their radio transmissions, and predict their movements through mathematical analysis struck at fundamental assumptions about submarine warfare. The German response revealed how completely they misunderstood the nature of the threat they faced. Admiral Karl Dönitz, commanding the U-boat force, initially attributed increased Allied effectiveness to improved convoy escort procedures and better crew training. His staff analyzed captured equipment from downed Allied aircraft, but failed to grasp how radar, direction finding, and operational research had been integrated into a comprehensive anti-submarine system. Dönitz ordered tactical changes designed to counter what he perceived as improved Allied seamanship rather than technological superiority. Submarines were instructed to spend more time submerged, reduce radio transmissions, and avoid predictable patrol patterns. These modifications actually made submarines more vulnerable to the new detection methods by forcing them to rely more heavily on the technologies that Allied scientists had learned to exploit. The intelligence war that preceded the submarine massacre involved some of the most sophisticated analysis conducted during World War II. The government code and cipher school at Bletchley Park had been working to break German naval Enigma codes since 1940, but the 4-rotor Enigma machines introduced in February 1942 had restored German communication security just as the Battle of the Atlantic reached its climax. Instead of abandoning signals intelligence, Allied cryptographers developed alternative approaches that extracted actionable intelligence from encrypted communications without breaking the codes
themselves. Traffic analysis examined the volume, timing, and routing of German radio messages to identify operational patterns. Even encrypted messages revealed information about submarine deployment, command structure, and operational tempo that could be exploited tactically. Dr. Susan Crawford led the traffic analysis section at Bletchley Park, supervising teams of mathematicians and linguists who treated German communications as statistical problems rather than cryptographic challenges. Her analysts discovered that submarine patrol assignments could be predicted by analyzing the sequence and timing of administrative messages from U-boat headquarters, even when the actual operational orders remained encrypted. The breakthrough came when Crawford's team identified recurring patterns in message traffic that corresponded to submarine departures, patrol assignments, and return schedules. By combining this intelligence with direction-finding data and operational research models, Allied commanders could position anti-submarine forces along predicted submarine routes with timing accuracy measured in hours rather than days. The first major test of the integrated Neptune's Trident system came in March 1943 during the battle for convoys HX-229 and SC-122, when 40 German submarines attempted to overwhelm Allied escort forces through coordinated attack. The battle would demonstrate decisively whether traditional submarine tactics could survive against mathematically optimized countermeasures supported by revolutionary detection technology. Kapitän José Rolf Mützelburg commanded the submarine group Stürmer, tasked with intercepting the convoys as they approached the mid-Atlantic air gap, where Allied aircraft coverage had traditionally been weakest. His 18 submarines represented some of Germany's most experienced crews, including veterans of successful operations against previous convoys. Mützelburg planned to coordinate surface attacks during darkness, using superior numbers to overwhelm escort vessels and create gaps in the defensive screen. What Mützelburg didn't know was that his submarine movements had been tracked continuously since departing their French bases 2 weeks earlier. Allied direction finding stations had plotted their course across the Bay of Biscay, identified their refueling rendezvous with supply submarines, and predicted their interception coordinates through operational research analysis. By the time Stürmer Group reached attack position, they were surrounded by Allied forces positioned according to mathematical models that had calculated optimal hunter-killer patrol patterns. The engagement began on March 16th when HMS Harvester, equipped with centimetric radar and Luftwaffe equipment, detected U-444 at a range of 12 miles during conditions of heavy overcast that would have provided complete concealment for submarines just months earlier. Lieutenant Commander Arthur Tate ordered an immediate attack using the new Hedgehog anti-submarine mortar, achieving a direct hit that sent U-444 to the bottom with all hands before the submarine could transmit a contact report. The destruction of U-444 without warning or radio transmission meant that Mützelburg remained unaware that his group had been detected until U-134 disappeared 6 hours later under similar circumstances. By dawn on March 17th, 4 submarines had been sunk without scoring any hits on merchant vessels, forcing Mützelburg to abort the coordinated attack and scatter his remaining submarines across a wider area. The scatter order played directly into Allied tactical planning. Operational research analysis had determined that isolated submarines were more vulnerable to detection than coordinated groups because they could not provide mutual support or share reconnaissance information. As Stürmer Group dispersed, they entered patrol areas that had been pre-positioned with hunter-killer groups using optimal search patterns calculated to maximize detection probability. U-91, commanded by Kapitänleutnant Heinz Walkeling, was intercepted on March 18th by HMS Storkling using a tactic developed by operational research analysts. Walkeling believed he was safely out of range of Allied aircraft by HMS Vedet while attempting to reach an alternate attack position. The frigate's centimetric radar detected the submarine's periscope at 8,000 yards during a rain squall that reduced visual observation to less than 500 yards. Walkeling attempted to crash dive, but the submarine's emergency descent was tracked continuously by radar until HMS Vedet could position herself directly above the submarine's predicted location. The Hedgehog attack that destroyed U-91 represented the culmination of 3 separate technological advantages working in coordination. Centimetric radar had provided initial detection despite adverse weather conditions. Improved sonar maintained contact during the submarine's dive. Mathematical analysis of submarine performance characteristics allowed accurate prediction of the boat's position even when sonar contact was temporarily lost due to thermal layers in the water. Similar engagements occurred throughout the battle zone as German submarines encountered Allied forces that seemed to possess supernatural awareness of their positions and movements. U-221 was attacked by aircraft that appeared overhead within minutes of surfacing to recharge batteries. U-616 was intercepted by surface vessels that approached from the exact bearing needed to block escape routes. U-333 was destroyed by depth charges dropped precisely over its position despite being submerged at 200 feet in complete darkness. The technological superiority that devastated German submarine operations extended beyond detection and attack systems to encompass intelligence processing and command coordination capabilities that transformed anti-submarine warfare from reactive to predictive. The Western Approaches Unit, established at Liverpool under Captain Gilbert Roberts, used wargaming and tactical analysis to develop countermeasures for every known German submarine tactic. Roberts had assembled teams of experienced naval officers, operational research scientists, and intelligence specialists who studied captured German documents interrogated prisoners, and analyzed combat reports to understand submarine operational methods in unprecedented detail. The unit operated a large-scale tactical plot that tracked all known submarine movements across the Atlantic, updating positions continuously as new intelligence became available from multiple sources. The integration of intelligence sources provided Allied commanders with situational awareness that German submarine commanders couldn't comprehend. While U-boat captains operated with limited knowledge of Allied movements and capabilities, their opponents possessed detailed information about submarine positions, fuel states, weapon loads, and crew morale gathered through signals intelligence, direction finding, radar tracking, and prisoner interrogation. This information asymmetry became decisive during the climactic phase of the Battle of the Atlantic in May 1943, when Admiral Dönitz committed his entire available submarine force to one final attempt at severing the Atlantic supply lines. Operation Drumbeat II involved 62 submarines operating in coordinated groups across multiple convoy routes, representing the largest submarine offensive in naval history. Allied intelligence detected the operation's preparation through increased message traffic from U-boat headquarters, unusual submarine movements observed by coast watchers in occupied France, and signals analysis indicating large-scale coordination between submarine groups. By the time the first submarines departed their bases, Allied forces were already positioning according to predicted intercept coordinates calculated through operational research models. The massacre that followed demonstrated conclusively that traditional submarine warfare had become obsolete in the face of integrated technological countermeasures. During the first week of May 1943, 23 German submarines were destroyed while achieving minimal success against Allied shipping. The loss rate exceeded 40%, making submarine operations statistically unsustainable regardless of strategic objectives. Kapitänleutnant Franz Weber commanded U-109 during what became known as Black May among German submariners. His patrol report, recovered from German archives after the war, documented the complete breakdown of submarine tactical advantages that had dominated Atlantic warfare since 1940. Weber described being tracked continuously by unseen enemies, attacked by aircraft that appeared without warning, and forced to abandon multiple attack approaches when Allied escort vessels positioned themselves with uncanny accuracy to block escape routes. The psychological impact on surviving German crews proved as devastating as the physical losses. Submarine warfare had attracted volunteers who valued independence, tactical flexibility, and the technical challenge of operating complex vessels under extreme conditions. The transformation of submarine operations from skilled seamanship to a form of mathematical persecution, where every move was anticipated and countered, destroyed the intellectual satisfaction that had motivated many U-boat officers. Interrogation reports from captured submariners revealed widespread demoralization, fatalistic attitudes, and loss of confidence in German technical superiority. Kapitänleutnant Gustav Pohl, captured when U-413 was sunk on May 20th, told interrogators that submarine crews had begun referring to their boats as iron coffins and patrol missions as suicide runs. The elite submarine service that had once represented the cream of the German Navy was disintegrating under technological pressure that rendered courage and skill irrelevant. The strategic implications extended far beyond the immediate tactical victories achieved by Allied anti-submarine forces. German submarine operations had been essential to Germany's strategy of economic warfare against Britain, threatening the supply lines that sustained British resistance and enabled the buildup of American forces in Europe. The neutralization of the submarine threat removed Germany's most effective weapon against Allied logistics, ensuring that the planned invasion of Europe could proceed without fear of supply interdiction. The resource allocation consequences proved equally significant for Germany's overall war effort. The submarine force had absorbed massive quantities of steel, specialized equipment, and highly trained personnel that became increasingly scarce as the war progressed. The loss of 783 submarines in 6 months represented not just tactical defeat, but strategic catastrophe, eliminating resources that could never be replaced given Germany's deteriorating industrial situation. Admiral Donitz recognized the futility of continuing submarine operations under existing conditions when he issued the recall order on May 24, 1943, withdrawing surviving submarines from the North Atlantic convoy routes where they had achieved their greatest successes. The withdrawal marked the effective end of the Battle of the Atlantic as a contest between German submarines and Allied shipping, transforming it into a one-sided campaign of attrition against an increasingly desperate enemy. The technological revolution that destroyed German submarine effectiveness represented more than improved equipment or better tactics. It demonstrated how scientific methodology could be applied systematically to military problems, treating warfare as an engineering challenge that could be solved through research, analysis, and technological development. The integration of radar, direction finding, operational research, and intelligence analysis created synergistic effects that multiplied the effectiveness of individual systems. This approach to military problem-solving would define the remainder of World War II and influence military development throughout the Cold War period. The scientists and engineers who participated in Operation Neptune's Trident went on to develop radar-guided missiles, electronic warfare systems, computer-assisted command and control, and eventually the satellite-based navigation and communication systems that dominate modern military operations. The transformation of anti-submarine warfare also established precedents for applying civilian scientific expertise to military challenges, creating institutional relationships between universities, research laboratories, and military organizations that persisted long after the war ended. The success of operational research in optimizing anti-submarine tactics led to its application across all areas of military planning, from strategic bombing to amphibious assault operations. For the German submarine force, the technological defeat represented not just tactical failure, but complete conceptual obsolescence. The submarines that had terrorized Allied shipping were designed according to principles developed during World War I, emphasizing stealth, endurance, and crew skill over technological sophistication. When these traditional advantages were neutralized by scientific countermeasures, German submarines had no alternative operational methods available. The contrast between Allied technological adaptation and German tactical rigidity illustrated fundamental differences in military philosophy that would prove decisive across all theaters of the war. While Allied forces embraced scientific innovation and mathematical optimization, German military culture remained committed to traditional concepts of courage, skill, and superior leadership that were increasingly irrelevant in technological warfare. The final phase of German submarine operations became a futile attempt to restore effectiveness through incremental improvements to existing systems, rather than fundamental reconceptualization of submarine warfare. New submarine designs incorporated improved battery capacity, enhanced underwater speed, and better sound dampening, but these modifications could not overcome the basic vulnerability of submarines operating against integrated detection networks supported by mathematical analysis. The Schnorkel breathing system, introduced in late 1943, allowed submarines to recharge batteries while remaining submerged, but actually increased vulnerability to radar detection because the Schnorkel head created a distinctive signature that Allied radar operators learned to identify. German attempts to develop radar-absorbing coatings for submarine hulls proved ineffective against centimetric radar wavelengths, while acoustic countermeasures failed to defeat improved sonar systems that used multiple frequencies and sophisticated signal processing. By the war's end, German submarine losses had reached catastrophic proportions that made continued operations impossible regardless of strategic necessity. Of approximately 1,200 submarines commissioned by the German Navy during World War II, over 800 were destroyed, and most of the remainder were scuttled by their crews to prevent capture. The personnel losses were equally devastating, with survival rates among submarine crews falling below 25% during the final years of the war. The mathematical precision of the Allied anti-submarine campaign created an inexorable logic that made German submarine defeat inevitable once the technological systems were fully deployed. Operational research analysis demonstrated that submarine effectiveness declined exponentially as Allied capabilities improved, creating a positive feedback loop where each submarine destroyed reduced the effectiveness of remaining submarines, while Allied forces gained experience and refined their techniques. The statistical analysis conducted by Professor Blackett's team predicted with remarkable accuracy that German submarine operations would become unsustainable once Allied detection capabilities exceeded critical thresholds calculated from submarine patrol patterns, attack frequencies, and loss rates. The mathematics of warfare had replaced the art of war, at least in the specific domain of anti-submarine operations, where conditions allowed comprehensive measurement and analysis.
Transformation from intuitive to analytical military thinking represented one of World War II's most significant innovations, establishing methodologies that would influence military planning throughout the nuclear age. The success of mathematical approaches to tactical problems encouraged the development of systems analysis, game theory, and computer simulation as tools for military decision-making, laying foundations for the military-industrial academic complex that emerged during the Cold War. The destruction of 783 German submarines in 6 months through Operation Neptune's Trident marked the end of traditional submarine warfare and the beginning of an era where technological superiority could overcome numerical advantages, tactical skill, and strategic surprise through mathematical precision applied to military problems. The Allied victory demonstrated that modern warfare would be won not by the bravest warriors, but by the smartest scientists, establishing precedents that continue to influence military development today. The technological annihilation of the German submarine force created ripple effects that extended far beyond the immediate tactical victories in the North Atlantic. The methodical destruction of 783 submarines represented the first time in military history that scientific analysis had been weaponized so comprehensively that traditional military virtues became not just inadequate, but counterproductive. German submarine commanders who had terrorized Allied shipping for 3 years found themselves reduced to statistical probabilities and mathematical models that predicted their destruction with algorithmic precision. The human cost of this technological revolution became apparent through the personal accounts of the few German submariners who survived the carnage of 1943. Oberleutnant zur See Klaus Friedmann commanded U-372 during what German naval historians would later call the Todesmonat, the death months when submarine losses reached levels that made continued operations a form of organized suicide. His memoir, published decades after the war, described the psychological transformation of submarine crews who realized they were no longer warriors, but targets in a scientific experiment conducted by enemy forces they could neither see nor understand. Friedman's account detailed the breakdown of traditional military discipline as crews recognized the futility of their missions. Submarines that had once operated with clockwork precision began experiencing equipment failures, navigational errors, and communication breakdowns that reflected the deteriorating morale of crews who knew they were sailing to their deaths. The elite submarine service that had attracted Germany's most capable naval officers was disintegrating under pressure that negated every aspect of their training and experience. The interrogation records from Allied prisoner of war camps revealed the depth of German confusion about what was destroying their submarine force. Captured officers provided detailed descriptions of attacks that seemed to violate the fundamental principles of naval warfare. Submarines were being detected while fully submerged, in conditions that should have provided complete concealment. Attack aircraft appeared over submarines within minutes of surfacing, as if Allied forces possessed supernatural awareness of German movements. Surface vessels intercepted submarines with timing that suggested enemy commanders could predict German tactical decisions before they were made. Commander Sarah Mitchell supervised prisoner interrogations at the Combined Services Detailed Interrogation Center, extracting intelligence from captured submariners that revealed how completely German naval thinking had been overtaken by technological developments. Her reports documented a systematic pattern of German misunderstanding about the nature of Allied capabilities, with captured officers attributing their defeats to luck, betrayal, or mysterious new weapons, rather than recognizing the mathematical precision of the campaign being conducted.
Waged against them. The intelligence gathered from these interrogations provided crucial insights into German submarine operations that allowed Allied forces to refine their anti-submarine techniques even further. Mitchell's teams learned about submarine endurance limitations, crew rotation schedules, and tactical procedures that could be exploited through operational research analysis. Every captured submarine officer became an unwitting contributor to the mathematical models that were systematically destroying his former colleagues. The strategic implications of German submarine defeat extended beyond maritime warfare to encompass the entire German war effort. The submarine force had represented Germany's most effective weapon for attacking Allied logistics, threatening the supply lines that sustained British resistance and enabled the massive buildup of American forces in Europe. The neutralization of submarine operations removed the primary threat to Allied shipping, ensuring that the invasion of Europe could proceed without fear of supply interdiction. Admiral Ernest King, commanding the United States Navy, recognized that the defeat of German submarines had fundamentally altered the strategic balance of the war. His staff analyses indicated that Allied shipping losses had dropped to levels that allowed unrestricted movement of personnel and equipment across the Atlantic, transforming what had been a precarious supply line into a secure logistics pipeline that could support offensive operations on any scale required. The economic implications proved equally significant for both Allied and German war production. The security of Atlantic shipping lanes allowed Britain to import essential raw materials and food supplies, while providing safe passage for American industrial output destined for European operations. Simultaneously, the massive resources that Germany had invested in submarine construction and operation were eliminated without achieving strategic objectives, representing a catastrophic misallocation of increasingly scarce materials and personnel. The industrial statistics revealed the magnitude of German losses beyond the 783 submarines destroyed. Each submarine required approximately 1,500 tons of high-grade steel, sophisticated electrical equipment, precision machinery, and specialized components that could not be easily replaced given Germany's deteriorating supply situation. The destruction of the submarine force eliminated resources equivalent to several armored divisions, creating shortages that affected German capabilities across all theaters of war. The personnel losses were even more devastating because submarine crews represented some of Germany's most highly trained military specialists. Each submarine carried officers with years of training in navigation, engineering, and tactical operations, along with petty officers skilled in complex technical systems that required extensive education to operate effectively. The death of these experienced personnel created knowledge gaps that could not be filled through accelerated training programs, particularly as Germany's educational infrastructure deteriorated under Allied bombing. Professor Wilhelm Heisenberg, the German physicist who had worked on nuclear weapons research, provided post-war analysis of why German science had failed to develop countermeasures for Allied anti-submarine technology. His report identified fundamental weaknesses in German research methodology that had prevented effective responses to Allied innovations. German scientists had remained focused on incremental improvements to existing systems rather than recognizing that Allied capabilities represented entirely new approaches to military problems requiring revolutionary rather than evolutionary solutions. The German failure to understand the nature of Allied technological superiority reflected deeper problems in military scientific cooperation that handicapped German research throughout the war.
Military and academic institutions that rarely communicated effectively. This organizational structure prevented the interdisciplinary collaboration necessary to develop comprehensive responses to Allied innovations. The institutional barriers that hampered German technological development were compounded by ideological constraints that limited scientific inquiry. Nazi racial theories had driven many of Germany's most capable scientists into exile, while political orthodoxy often took precedence over scientific accuracy in research programs. The result was a scientific establishment that lacked the intellectual flexibility necessary to adapt to rapidly changing technological conditions.
The contrast between Allied and German approaches to military science became apparent through comparative analysis of research priorities and resource allocation. While Allied forces invested heavily in operational research, electronic warfare, and systems integration, German research remained focused on traditional engineering problems that could be solved through incremental improvements to existing equipment. This mismatch between Allied innovation and German conservatism ensured that technological gaps would widen rather than narrow as the war progressed. The mathematical precision of Allied anti-submarine operations also demonstrated the effectiveness of applying civilian analytical methods to military problems. The operational research teams led by Professor Blackett had treated submarine warfare as a statistical problem that could be solved through data analysis and mathematical modeling. This approach produced tactical innovations that military officers trained in traditional methods would never have considered. The success of mathematical approaches to military problems established precedents that would influence defense planning throughout the Cold War period. The integration of scientific methodology with military planning created new institutional relationships between universities, research laboratories, and defense organizations that persisted long after the war ended. The scientists who participated in anti-submarine operations went on to develop radar-guided missiles, electronic countermeasures, and eventually the computerized command and control systems that define modern warfare. The psychological impact of technological defeat on German military culture extended beyond the submarine service to affect German strategic thinking across all theaters of war. The systematic destruction of submarines through scientific analysis challenged fundamental assumptions about military effectiveness that had guided German planning since the beginning of the conflict. Traditional emphasis on courage, skill, and aggressive tactics had proven inadequate against enemies who fought with mathematical precision rather than martial valor. General Heinz Guderian, the architect of German armored tactics, recognized that the submarine defeat represented more than tactical failure, but indicated fundamental changes in the nature of warfare that required complete reconceptualization of military strategy. His post-war memoirs describe the submarine catastrophe as the moment when German military leadership realized that technological superiority could overcome numerical advantages, tactical flexibility, and operational experience through systematic application of scientific principles to military problems. The technological lessons learned from anti-submarine operations were rapidly applied to other areas of Allied military activity, creating synergistic effects that multiplied the impact of individual innovations. Radar technology developed for submarine detection was adapted for air defense, artillery control, and navigation systems. Direction-finding techniques pioneered against submarines were modified for electronic warfare against German communications. Operational research methods proved in maritime warfare were extended to strategic bombing, logistics planning, and amphibious assault operations. The integration of these technologies created comprehensive systems that optimized the use of information, communication, command, and control resources across branches of the military.
That provided Allied forces with decisive advantages across multiple domains of warfare. By 1944, Allied capabilities in electronic warfare, signals intelligence, and mathematical analysis had created information dominance that made German military planning increasingly ineffective. Every German radio transmission was intercepted and analyzed. Every movement was tracked and predicted. Every tactical decision was anticipated and countered through systematic application of scientific methodology. The British cryptanalysts at Bletchley Park had finally succeeded in breaking German naval Enigma codes by late 1943, providing direct access to submarine operational orders and strategic planning documents. This intelligence breakthrough, combined with the direction-finding and operational research capabilities already in place, created comprehensive awareness of German submarine intentions that made Allied countermeasures devastatingly effective. Dr. Alan Turing, whose work on mechanical computation had contributed to Enigma decryption efforts, recognized that the integration of intelligence sources with analytical processing represented a new form of warfare that would define future conflicts.
His theoretical work on machine intelligence and automated computation laid foundations for the computer-assisted command systems that would emerge during the Cold War, when mathematical analysis became essential for managing the complexity of nuclear warfare. The cultural shock of technological defeat proved particularly traumatic for German naval officers, who had been trained in the traditions of seamanship, navigation, and tactical flexibility that had defined naval warfare for centuries. The reduction of submarine operations to statistical probabilities in enemy mathematical models negated personal skill, operational experience, and tactical innovation in ways that challenged fundamental assumptions about military professionalism. Kapitänsodyssee Wolfgang Luth, one of Germany's most successful submarine commanders, described in his final patrol report how technological warfare had eliminated the intellectual satisfaction that had motivated career naval officers. Submarine operations had been transformed from a complex interplay of seamanship, tactics, and technological capability into a form of mechanized slaughter where human agency was irrelevant to operational outcomes. The demoralization of German submarine crews was compounded by their recognition that Allied forces possessed capabilities that rendered traditional submarine advantages obsolete. Stealth had been neutralized by radar and direction-finding systems that could track submarines regardless of weather conditions or tactical countermeasures. Surprise had been eliminated by operational research that predicted submarine movements with mathematical precision. Superior seamanship had become irrelevant when enemy forces could calculate optimal countermeasures faster than human crews could implement tactical changes. The transformation of submarine warfare from an art to a science reflected broader changes in military affairs that would accelerate throughout the remainder of World War II and continue into the nuclear age. The success of mathematical approaches to tactical problems encouraged the development of systems analysis, game theory, and computer simulation as tools for military planning, establishing methodologies that would define defense planning throughout the Cold War period. The institutional legacy of Operation Neptune's Trident extended far beyond its immediate tactical success in defeating German submarines. The integration of civilian scientists with military planners created new organizational models for defense research that would be formalized in post-war institutions like the RAND Corporation, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, and the various national laboratories that emerged during the Cold War. These organizations perpetuated the collaborative approach to military problems that had proven so effective against submarine threats during World War II.
German submarines. The educational impact of anti-submarine operations was equally significant, as military officers who had participated in mathematically driven campaigns recognized the importance of scientific training for future military leadership. The service academies and staff colleges that had traditionally emphasized classical military subjects began incorporating mathematics, engineering, and scientific methodology into their curricula, producing generations of officers who understood warfare in technological as well as tactical terms. The strategic implications of German submarine defeat became apparent during the planning for Operation Overlord, the Allied invasion of Europe. The security of Atlantic shipping lanes ensured that massive quantities of personnel and equipment could be transported to Britain without significant losses, enabling the concentration of forces necessary for successful amphibious assault. The elimination of submarine threats also allowed Allied naval forces to be redeployed from convoy escort duties to direct support of invasion operations. General Dwight Eisenhower, commanding Allied forces in Europe, recognized that the defeat of German submarines had been essential to the success of subsequent Allied operations. His strategic assessments indicated that continued submarine effectiveness could have delayed or prevented the invasion of Europe by interdicting the supply lines necessary to sustain large-scale continental operations. The technological victory in the Battle of the Atlantic had created conditions that made Allied victory in Europe inevitable.
The long-term consequences of technological warfare extended beyond immediate military applications to influence post-war international relations and defense policy. The demonstration that scientific research could produce decisive military advantages encouraged massive government investment in research and development that would characterize the Cold War competition between the United States and Soviet Union. The military-industrial academic complex that emerged after 1945 was directly descended from the organizational innovations that had proven so effective against German submarines. The ethical implications of automated warfare, first raised by the systematic destruction of German submarines through mathematical analysis, would become increasingly relevant as technology continued to advance. The reduction of human beings to statistical probabilities in targeting algorithms raised questions about moral responsibility in warfare that remain unresolved today. The scientists who participated in anti-submarine operations had created precedents for removing human agency from lethal decisions that would be extended through cruise missiles, drone strikes, and eventually autonomous weapons systems. The psychological trauma experienced by German submarine crews, who faced incomprehensible technological superiority, would be repeated throughout subsequent conflicts as traditional military forces encountered opponents equipped with advanced electronic warfare, precision-guided weapons, and comprehensive surveillance systems. The confusion and helplessness described by German survivors became characteristic of military forces that found their training and experience negated by technological developments they could neither understand nor counter. The industrial implications of the submarine defeat extended beyond immediate military consequences to affect post-war economic development in both Allied and Axis nations. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.